So Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. So we're talking about marriage. So marriage actually connects together a man and a woman to share a life together and to establish a family. So if you look at what is the purpose behind marriage, in Western society we often define marriage as, a love relationship between two people. But in Islam, marriage is much deeper than that. It actually is a means to establish a family, and that serves as a means to regulate relations between genders in a society, and also a means or a method or a mechanism to identify the relationship of children to certain aspects of the family. So basically, marriage is a means to build a family. Okay, that's the only way it can really occur, right? To have a family. And the family is a social unit within a community which actually makes the society function in a certain way, in a stronger way, in a better way. So it's very important to understand the idea of family, otherwise you're going to miss the point of marriage. Right? So it's more than just a relationship between two people. It's a relationship between two people in order to make a family, and it's a relationship between two families as well. So what's the importance of a family in Islam? This is a little bit outside of Islamic law, but the point of having a family is that Allah has defined and decided that if we take society as just individuals, everyone is on their own, it's not going to be a very productive way of living. So if you look at communism, for example, everyone is on their own, and at the same time, they're all going to be equal in terms of their financial status. If you look at extreme forms of communism, like those which existed at one time in Persia, under the Mazdites, communism became even more extreme, where even the relationships were communistic. So it's not only your money, but it's your wives and your family and your kids who also are shared by everyone across the board. Really, just anarchy. So that kind of understanding is, it views the individual, it views a person as an individual within society. The capitalistic understanding, and these are the two most common forms of understanding, also views the person as an individual. But Islam says that for the benefit of these people, for the benefit of generally all people in terms of being taken care of, and not only financially, but emotionally and psychologically and everything, if you create little family units where the family is going to be dedicated to one another, due to blood relationships, the society is going to function at a better level than it would if they were just everyone is individually for themselves. So for example, if somebody is poor and somebody needs financial assistance, the first person, or somebody even doesn't need financial assistance, but giving financial assistance to somebody, the first person you would choose is your family. Is a family member over a non-family member. The same way that we choose a closer neighbor over a distant neighbor. And the reason for that is because it's understood that if every individual family unit works the way it should be, everyone's going to be taken care of. And only the people without families, or the ones whose families are oppressing them, they're the ones who are going to need help from outside, like from the Muslim government, or from the zakah, or from something else. Rather than the government being responsible, or some group of Muslims being responsible for taking care of everyone on an individual level. So the responsibility within the family is created. Anyways, that's the point of marriage and establishing a society. So that's the means through which to determine to build a family, and children have to be ascribed to somebody. So that's another way of ascribing children to a family. So what is the status of marriage? It's actually against Islam to remain unmarried on purpose without any excuse at all. Okay, it's going against the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He said that the marriage is, among my sunnah, among my way, and whoever goes against my way is, not from amongst us. So you should be, it's very important that people get married. When should you get married? A person should marry as soon as they are ready. Now what does ready mean? Ready means in terms of their maturity, and there's a huge gray area, especially today, their financial ability, and other things. So when you're ready for marriage, you should not delay and you should get married. And if somebody is unable to get married, what should they do? They should fast in order to control their desires and do other things, not only fasting. Because I know brothers who are actually, I know brothers specifically, who are fasting. I know some brothers who literally, they fasted, months in a row straight. And normally that's prohibited in Islam, but in the Maliki madhab, in this context, it's allowed. So they did that, they happened to follow the Maliki madhab, and still it wasn't working for them. So it's not only fasting, you have to do more than just fast, but something to control your desires. What to look for in a spouse. This is not really part of Islamic law, but I'm just going to throw some of these things in there. So it's not comprehensive either, because this is a class on Islamic law, but I'm going to throw a few things in there so people get an idea for what to look for. A Muslim should seek to marry somebody who is suitable. And the idea of suitability is very important in Islamic law. It's called kafa'a. Kafa'a basically someone who's matches with you, compatible with you, right? No, not even compatible. Someone who's more same level, because compatibility is, again, viewed from an individual perspective. Not from the Western point of view. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, compatible with you, but not from the Western, purely individualistic point of view. So the first and most important thing to look for in a spouse is piety and religiosity. That's the first thing. And if you don't look for this, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said people search for different things in a spouse. And this is one of the things that they look for. And he said, if you don't focus on this, taribat yada. He said, your hands will be filled with dust. Meaning that, you tried to grab something, you wanted to get something, and in reality you realized you had nothing. So this is the number one thing that people should be searching for. And then other factors to consider, which fall under the category of suitability or compatibility, lineage or family status. So it does play a role, and it plays a legitimate role. So if you happen to be, let's say, from a royal family, right, and you wanted to marry somebody from, a very poor section of the society, right, there's nothing against Islam for you to do that, right? But at the same time, it's not just about you, right? Because you have a family, and your family is within a society, so it's something which should be taken into consideration. It should not be given top priority, but it should be taken into consideration. As opposed to the idea of, Aladdin and the princess and all of this. This is love stories and all of that. Since technically you're not supposed to be in a relationship in the first place, outside of marriage, this is something which is actually not difficult to take into consideration under normal circumstances. And then we'll talk about our American circumstances where all of this gets messed up. Financial stability, or financial suitability. This is very important. So for example, if you're coming from a household where you have 3 maids or 3 servants who are taking care of you, and then you decide, you know what, I want to marry Aladdin, right? He's not going to be able to provide you with that kind of financial assistance. So it's very important to take care, to consider financial stability or financial suitability in terms of what class you're coming from. And beauty is a concern as well. It's a factor as well. So I had one brother come up to me, interestingly the other day, and I said, what level of beauty are you looking for? You need to be honest with me, because most people, every time I recommend somebody, they say no, I'm not interested. I said, just be honest with me. What's the issue? And they say, oh yeah, I'm looking for more beauty. So one brother came up to me and he said, you know what? He said, if I don't got it, I'm not going to ask for that much either. So don't worry about me. I'm open. I'm flexible. So it is something to take into consideration, although it should not be a primary consideration. And then there are other culturally dependent factors. And this is what I mean by all these factors are actually culturally dependent. And for the most part, they're universal in terms of culture. But in our culture, we have some issues. And the issues is that people have dual identities. Right? So especially people from the younger generation who were born or at least grew up in America, they're still trying to define whether or not are they American primarily, or are they from back home where their parents are from? Or are they some conglomerate mix of like 50-50, or is it 70-30, or what is it? This is something which makes our situation more difficult. Makes it a lot more difficult. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So this is what you look for in a spouse. The marriage contract itself. So how do you perform the actual marriage? the marriage requires a proposal and an acceptance. And this is a requirement. This is an absolute must. So this is the main aspect of the marriage, the nikah that's actually taking place. And it needs to be in unequivocal words. So the words need to be extremely clear. And scholars emphasize this. So for example, if a man, during the marriage, the man can say, you know what, marry me. And the woman responds and she says, I have married you. Marriage is complete. Marriage is done, it'll work fine, no issues. But if the man says, marry me, and there are witnesses present and everything, he says, marry me, and the woman says, okay, I will marry you. This is a gray wording that can be used. So if the next day all of a sudden they get into a fight, and he says, you know what, I didn't even marry you. I said, I will marry you. I didn't mean I actually married you. So the will could actually imply something of the future tense. You don't want any type of contract as important. When you're making a business contract, when you hire the lawyers and they check for the language and they check really thoroughly. The reason they do that is because you don't want to leave any open ends. The same thing in a marriage contract. You want to make sure that the wording is very, very clear. So that's important to understand. So it should be very clear proposal and a very clear acceptance. You need to have 2 adult, sane Muslim male witnesses. Okay? These are the requirements. You need to have 2 adult, sane male Muslim witnesses that are there to witness what? To witness the proposal and to witness the acceptance. They don't need to be there for anything else except for this period of time. If a woman, and we're going to cover this in some later class, in this class, but in a later week, if the woman gives her guardian the permission to marry her and say the words on her behalf, then the witnesses do not need to witness the permission that was given. But they need to witness the wording that's coming from the guardian. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is in some cultures, what they do is, they do it on the day of the wedding. And to be very honest, it's very annoying for the person who came to perform the wedding, because they'll go and they'll walk into the women. It's annoying for the women as well. They'll walk into the women's section as a group of men to go and get the permission from the woman, and then they'll walk back and say, I got the permission in front of everyone. That's not an absolute requirement. Especially, if women want to have their own privacy, they don't get that privacy because they want to do it public. But if they do that, that's whatever, it's fine. The thing is, the witnessing has to be done in terms of just the proposal and the acceptance. That's where the witnesses are needed. And everyone else is a witness to the marriage actually, but you need 2 specifically in case there's an issue. So the minimum is 2. And the reason why witnesses are so important is because secret marriages or private marriages are not allowed in Islam. It's not supposed to be something where you just go in the corner and you say, okay, we're getting married and everything, and and you don't want to announce to the community or whatever. This is it's to prevent secret marriages, because then it's like a secret relationship, and it's like what's the point of marriage? One of the points of marriage is that you are publicly known to be a family now. And if you don't have that, then it's a problem. So this is a requirement. In case one male is not there, then 2 females can be substituted. And we're going to talk more about why that is when we get to economic transactions. The witnesses do not need to be upright Muslims. Now you think why would you say something like that? You say something like that because when you're giving testimony in a court of law, you're not allowed to take anyone except upright Muslims to testify for something of very big importance. But in terms of marriage, this is not a requirement, because if it was a requirement, you have a major issue with a lot of Muslims who are not very good Muslims, and therefore if their testimony didn't count, then so many people's marriages would be invalid. So in order to make it easy, Islam has not given us the stipulation that you have to have upright witnesses. And the second reason for it is because there's a proposal and an acceptance from the bride and the groom or her representative, and when they're giving this acceptance and 2 witnesses testify that it happened, they also serve as 2 more witnesses themselves, because obviously they're in a marriage relationship. So that's another reason for it. If a man is marrying a woman who's a Jew or a Christian and who's at peace with the Muslims, then the witnesses can also be Jews or Christians. They can actually serve as witnesses as well, because one of the couples is a Jew or a Christian. Both a man and a woman must consent to the marriage. It's an absolute requirement. So the whole idea of, forced marriages or something like that, particularly in different parts of the world, it's 100% against Islam. I mean, it cannot be it's as clear as daylight. So this is a cultural thing. So there has to be consent in marriage from both the man and the woman. The Prophet said, if the woman is a virgin, this is the first time she's getting married, and there's a whole difference of opinion on whether she's committed she's had other relationships outside of marriage. But if she's a virgin, the way that she'll show her consent, either by her saying yes, or by her staying quiet, or by her crying, or by her giggling, or anything that indicates that she's not opposed to the marriage. Now the reason why this stipulation is there, in more traditional cultures, it's generally something where you're not going to get a yes out of a young girl who's never been married before. So oftentimes they will be very shy, and therefore the Prophet, peace be upon him, wanted to clarify that yes, you need her consent. But what if she's not giving the yes, and you're waiting for the yes, and she's not speaking because she's crying or something like that? Anything that's pretty clearly a sign of a yes, based on context, is okay from her perspective, because this is the cultural norm, or at least it was in traditional societies. Now, the Prophet also said, but if it's a woman who's been with a man before, she's been previously married before, then you cannot take her silence as being consent. She specifically has to say yes, because culturally she would not be in the same level, because she's experienced marriage before. So she would not be in the same level as someone who's never experienced marriage before. So she has to speak. However, at any time you can appoint somebody else to agree on your behalf. So if somebody wants to be appointed to agree to a marriage on their behalf, whether it's a man or a woman, it can be done. So let's say you say, okay, well, I'm giving full authority to my father to decide whether or not this person is right for me, and whatever my father decides, that's going to be okay. So if a proposal comes and my dad says yes, then that means I agreed to the marriage. You can do that. But, and I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, you cannot pressure your children to get married. You cannot put any pressure on them, because that would be the opposite of getting their consent. So if you put some regulations that, we're not going to talk to you, or we're not going to do this, this is completely against Islam. Whoever stipulates an invalid condition in the marriage contract. So for example, somebody comes and says, you know what? If you marry my daughter, then you have to give me $1,000 in addition to paying her dowry. Okay? This is very common in some societies, right? Or if you put a condition, like for example, someone says, I'm going to marry your daughter, but I'm not going to give her any dowry. I'm going to marry you, but you don't get any, wedding gift. The marriage is valid, but it's prohibited. It's haram, what they're doing, but the marriage still is valid, but the condition is nullified, and it doesn't count. So the marriage still takes place, but the condition has no validity and is thrown out the door. So if somebody says, okay, fine, I agree, and the couple gets married, and they say, okay, hey, you promised me you got to give me $1,000 because you took my daughter or whatever. That person doesn't owe that man anything. And the reason why the marriage is valid is because imagine how many people do this without knowing or without understanding, and they ignorantly go and accept invalid conditions. Now imagine the couple's been living together for a month and they've already consummated the marriage, and then to go and say that, oh, you know what, your marriage was invalid the whole time. You two were not married to each other. You can imagine the ramifications. That's why it's valid, but the condition is invalid. So hopefully that's clear. If not, you can ask during the Q&A time. The guardian, what's known as the wali of the woman in particular who's going to be getting married, and suitability. What I talked about, compatibility, suitability, kafa'a. So it's important to understand this concept. So what we're going to be talking about right now, just so you know, is that scholars have held different opinions. Imam Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi school, he held one opinion, and his students and all the other scholars held a different opinion. So the opinion that I'm actually going to be teaching in this class right now is the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. So just be clear about that, just to so that you understand. And there's a reason why I'm doing that. So the guardian of a woman plays a major role in making sure that the woman is making the right decision regarding her marriage. And this is particularly for the women because oftentimes women are the ones who are going to get either abused or taken advantage of or tricked or something along those lines, because she's the one who's going to be moving in with the man and she's the one who's going to be traveling with her husband. So this is very important to understand why it is only particularly for women who have to have a guardian, whereas the men are not going to fall in the same boat. Who is a guardian? The guardian is her nearest sane and mature Muslim male blood relative. Okay, so someone who's very close to her. Basically, it means like it's her father. And it should be in the following order, although scholars have differed according to the order. So the order that we're going to come up with is, number one, father. If the father is alive, or if the father is a Muslim, or if the father is sane. Let's say the father is not sane, or he's dead, or he's not a Muslim. Then you move on to the brother. And if he's not qualified with all those conditions, you move on to the grandfather. And if he's not there, you move on to the paternal uncle. If he is not there, you move on to the paternal cousin. And if he's not there, you contact your local sheikh and you ask him what to do afterwards. Okay? So you don't need to memorize all of them, but you need to understand kind of what's going on. Alright? If there are no male relatives at all, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, a mother or sister or an aunt can start taking the place of these people. If there's no blood relative at all, there's nobody there at all. So like for example, when someone who's a convert, a revert, accepts Islam and they want to get married, there's no relative who qualifies because none of them are Muslim. So what happens? The Muslim leader will represent that woman. So who is the Muslim leader? Well, technically it should be the Khalifa. And if there's no Khalifa, it should be a Muslim judge. And if there's no Muslim judge, then it will be a local scholar who's seen in the community as a Muslim leader. Not some random guy who memorized the Quran or something like that. It needs to be someone who is going to take take this converts or whoever it is, their situation and the person whom they're marrying in their, like they're going to take it seriously. They're not going to just let this person, just go marry anyone. So this person's going to go and they're going to literally interrogate this guy. And you should see Shaykh Faqih doing it. It's beautiful. Literally going to interrogate the guy and find out, what's your real intention for marrying this girl? You just came from like some Arab country and you wanted to marry some white girl. Is that what it was? Or you have, you want her money. Is that what it is? Because you're poor and you don't have a job and you want someone who can take care of you. Whatever it is, you interrogate and you try and find out what the real intention is. Because the whole point of this is to try to make sure the woman is not going to be taken advantage of. Okay? So that's something that's agreed upon. And that's actually a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Yeah, the guardian should not object to somebody who is suitable. So because the guardian, the wali, plays a very important role in making sure that the marriage is good, the question is, what role does the guardian actually play? So this is where the two opinions come. The first opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa is that the woman does not need to get the permission of her guardian before getting married. But if the person, the man that she's marrying, is unsuitable meaning those characteristics we talked about in terms of level of religion, level of wealth, level of social standing, lineage, beauty and all of that, if they're not compatible and they're not on par, then the guardian has the right to petition a Muslim judge to verify whether or not they're suitable or not. And if they're not suitable, then the marriage can be revoked and they will be separated. That's Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion. So a lot of people, they think Imam Abu Hanifa said, you don't need to have the permission of your guardian and you can get married. That's not what he said. Understand, when you combine the two together, you don't have to have the permission, but if they're not suitable, they have the right to go and get your marriage annulled. That means that they have still a big responsibility. The other scholars said that the guardian has to give permission, otherwise this woman cannot get married. Okay. So hopefully you see how close the two opinions are, but there's a slight difference between the two. So now that comes up to the question of suitability. And that's why we have a big issue in our culture, because what is suitability, or what is considered to be suitable or compatible, is very culturally dependent, and we're still, fixing out our identity crisis. So if the judge declares that the match is unsuitable, that marriage can be invalidated, and the guardian will bring up the case to the judge. Now, what does this mean in reality? This does not mean that you go and you get married without the permission of your parents or your grandparents or whatever it is, and they're not going to be there or something like that. It means that if they're trying to force you or pressure you into getting married, or they're trying to prevent you from getting married, and you try your best and you're not getting married at all, then it's not an absolute requirement if the person is compatible. And the compatibility in this case has to be judged by someone other than your guardian. Because if you're already claiming that they're biased, then you need a third party to, decide between you. That's the whole point of this. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. And if the spouse is unsuitable, then you take your case to the Muslim judge. Okay, so the thing again, whenever we talk about Muslim judge, this is one of the problems that we face in America, is that we don't have a Muslim judge, right? Because a judge does not mean a scholar. A judge has to be a scholar as well. But a Muslim judge means that the moment the judge makes this declaration, whether you like it or not, it's happening on a legal level. The judge says that, you two are separated. That's it. You've been abusing her. I have declared that you two are separated now in marriage. That's a judge, and that's it. The two people, they're not married anymore. But if somebody goes to a local imam, and the imam says, look man, this person is abusing you and you need to get out of this relationship. He says, no, I don't have anywhere else to go. Says, no. Your marriage is now nullified. You can't do that. It's not going to work the same way, generally, for the most part. Because all he can do is give advice. Look, my advice, I'm telling you, you need to do this. And they say, well, we don't care about your advice. We're going to do whatever we want. So if the judge orders, for example, you need to pay your divorced wife $300 a month for the next 6 months. That means if you don't pay, it's going to be taken out of your bank account. If you go to the local scholar and it says, you need to pay $300 a month for the next 6 months, otherwise it's haram. I don't care. I'm not paying. I'll make tawbah afterwards. I'll ask Allah for forgiveness afterwards. So one of them is binding and one of them is not binding. So when we talk about Muslim judge, we don't have them in reality in America. But you have to try your best in terms of some kind of substitute, hoping that people will actually take a Muslim leader's advice into hand. So, moving on, dowry. Dowry is a necessary ingredient in the marriage. So it's a requirement of the marriage, but it's not a condition of the marriage. And I'll explain what that means. So it's necessary. What is dowry? Sometimes it's translated as dower. Because they say dowry is from the woman to the man, and dower is from the man to the woman. And in Islam, it's only from the man to the woman. It's never the other way around. So I've found contradictory definitions in dictionaries. So whatever term you use, we're talking about from the man to the woman. So it's a gift from the husband to the wife or to the bride for accepting the proposal. Because she's giving up some of her rights in terms of living with her family and all of that. So it's a gift and it's a sign of goodwill. To be very clear, the dowry is not a gift to the family. Okay? It's to the bride. And it cannot go to the family. So it's not that you're giving anything to the family. It has to go directly to the bride. If she gives it as a gift to the family, that's something else. Right? But not with any pressure. The minimum amount of dowry is basically something that's considered to be of value in your culture, in your custom. And there's no maximum. So in reality, there's no real maximum or minimum. But if you come and say, you know what, here's a brand new shiny quarter, I'm going to marry you on this. That's not something that's considered to be value in our society, right? Something of real value, right? So, mahar, yes, mahar. Mahar or sadaq, this is dowry. So we're talking about that. So it has to be something of actual value, okay? Like that's considered value, not like a little, here, I'm going to give you this little pointer, This is like $70, right? But this is not considered to be a really valuable thing as a gift, right? So something that's suitable as a gift. And there's no maximum either. So that means that if there's a woman who wants to demand $100,000 as her dowry, or even $500,000 as her dowry, she can do that, right? Now, I don't think many people are going to be marrying her, depending, maybe, but she can do that if she wants to. Okay, so there's actually no minimum, no maximum, and the recommendation in our society now, based upon the experiences that we've had, is that a woman should not settle for too little. She should not settle for a little bit, because what ends up happening is, especially if she does not have a large family, and she does not have, let's say, a degree or a job, prior job experience to fall back on, it can become problematic. So you should not take too little if that's the case. If the husband decides not to give the dowry immediately, and he doesn't want to give it now, then it remains a debt on him, and he has to pay it someday. So it's literally like a debt, okay, that has to be paid. The dowry does not need to be announced. So you don't need to announce how much, mahar or dowry was agreed upon in front of the witnesses or anything like that. Although it should be written down in our culture, it should be written down on the back of the marriage contract or something like that for legal reasons. Because if this thing gets taken to court, and it's happened before, somebody needs to witness. And if you perform so many marriages, you're not going to remember what these people agreed upon. It's very important to write it down on the paper. So this is more for people who are performing marriages. And you shouldn't be performing a marriage unless people know, the Muslim community knows that you're performing marriages and you're qualified to do so. It's a little side note. There are way too many people performing marriages in our community. And they're not really qualified, and they don't exactly know what they're doing. I don't mean the fiqh of what they're doing, I mean the wisdom of what they're doing in terms of the marriages that they're conducting. So be very careful about that. When the marriage is consummated, then the dowry has to be paid. The entire amount of dowry must be paid or due, or if the husband dies before that. Okay. Now what does consummation of marriage mean? Consummation of marriage generally refers to, intercourse. But in Islamic law, it's more than that. So if you are, what they say, behind closed doors, in privacy, such that there could have been intimacy taking place, then that's considered the marriage has been consummated, whether or not anything happened or didn't happen actually. So that means, so why is that important? That means that if they separate, right, then the dowry after consummation is due 100%, whatever you promise. So if you promise $10,000, $10,000 is due. However, if the woman is divorced or something happens before the consummation of the marriage, then only half the dowry is due to her, because the marriage has ended and they've not actually been alone together. So that's one of the reasons why consummation of marriage is important. It has to do with the dowry itself and how much will remain upon divorce prior to consummation of the marriage. Okay? If no dowry was specified, so this is what I said. So dowry is not a condition of marriage, such that if you don't specify a dowry and you got married, you say, oh well, you guys are not married. You've been committing adultery the whole time, fornication the whole time. No, your marriage is valid, but the dowry was not set. You guys didn't even talk about it for whatever reason. What happens in that case? You have to have a dowry. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that the woman is entitled to the customary dowry according to her culture. So whatever her culture deems that this type of woman generally gets this type of dowry, this is exactly what she's going to get, and that's what she has to receive. Alright, so taking into consideration all those different factors. If the dowry is initially set for the first time, or if it's modified through an increase or a decrease after the marriage, she's entitled to that as well. So you have two options. If you marry and there's no dowry that has been set, two things. One, if the guy says, let's just, whatever, let's not talk about it. She has a legal right to get the dowry of women according to her, women like her in her culture. Okay, people of the same status. Yeah, same status as her. Alright, so you check what her sister got and what her, what other people got. she gets the same. If the husband says, okay, no, you know what, we forgot and we didn't decide what it was, we want to fix it now. And the woman says, look, I want, I know my sister got 5,000, but I want 10,000. The guy agrees, fine. If she says, I want 2,500 and my sister got 5,000, and the guy agrees and she agrees, then it's 2,500. So whether it's an increase or decrease. If you get married, and after the marriage, you decide you want to increase or decrease the dowry. We agreed upon 5,000, and now she says, you know what, I want 10,000. The guy says, okay, I've raised it to 10,000. She's allowed to do that. So it's not that it can't be modified. So it can be modified either to increase or decrease, and if nothing is set, then she's automatically guaranteed the right to get the same of the women of her social status or her status. Okay? That's if it wasn't set. And if it was set, then an increase or decrease can apply. Yeah, it can apply. The marriage did not go through, or they divorced before consummation. Yeah, so she still is going to get the half of what customarily they get. So invalid marriages. This is like a side chapter, a side note. 2 types of marriages are invalid. One of them is marrying somebody for a specified time interval. So for example, somebody says, I propose to marry you for 1 year. And the woman says, okay, I've accepted that. This is not allowed at all. And this is unfortunate because there are some sects or groups who actually do this. So they send their students to different countries and they say, yeah, I'm going to marry this girl for 4 years. Why 4 years? Because my degree takes 4 years. And then I'm going to go back home and that's it. I'll get married back home. This is not allowed in Islam. It's been prohibited. Marrying somebody with the intention to divorce them so that they can remarry their former husband. We're going to get back. This makes sense to some people. We're going to come back to this. This is prohibited. Okay? Who you cannot marry. Okay, so who you're not allowed to get married to. Now let me just tell you a little caveat of mine. One of my personal weaknesses is understanding lineage. It just doesn't click in my head. Some people when they say, you know what, right hand, left hand, some people actually have this thing where it's hard for them to identify their right and left hand. They have to think like, okay, well, which hand do I write with? Oh, it doesn't snap directly. So for me, lineage is one of the things, it just, maybe it needs some therapy or something. It's one of those things that don't click very fast. So if you ask any questions about this, I need time to think and identify. So when I hear like, nephew's this, I'm thinking, okay, nephew, where does nephew come from? It comes from this line to this line. So when it comes to this chapter and our last class on inheritance, you have to, be patient with me. I need to identify the details. It takes me a very long time. It just doesn't click for some reason. So eternally prohibited people. Due to a blood relationship, these are people who you can never marry, which means the people who you don't need to observe the hijab in front of, except the things that we talked about. These are people you're never going to be able to marry. So eternally prohibited, meaning you can never ever marry them due to blood relationships. That's your parent or any grandparent. So you can't marry your father, you can't marry your mother, you can't marry your grandfather, you can't marry your grandmother. These are all people who you can never marry. Also, by the way, so this list that we're going through, just try and go through it in your own mind, because we have this problem in our community that when we talk about hijab and we talk about, hugging as a family, kissing as a family and all of that, people say, oh, well, no, he's like my uncle. Okay, he's not your uncle. He's like your uncle, but he's not your uncle. So go to this list. These are the only people who, when you meet them, you can hug them, and you can, sit down with them, and you can, grab them by the hand and walk across the street or something like that, because they're so close to you, you can never marry them. But anyone not in this list, you cannot do that with. Okay, so be very, understand this applies to hijab, it applies to, touching, it applies to, all of those things. Being in a car, alone with no barriers or something like that. Being in a private room alone, something like that. All of these things apply. It's very important. Due to blood relationship, parent or any grandparent. So that's number 1. Number 2, a child or any grandchild. Okay, all the way down. Number 3, a sibling, brother or sister. Number 4, uncles and aunts, or the uncles and aunts of your parents as well. Okay, they also apply. Number 5, the sibling's child, the child of your sibling. And I'm using very vague terms to apply for male and female. So what are your siblings' child? Those are your nieces and nephews. All right? That note is for myself. So these are your nieces and nephews. All right? So these are the people who are prohibited due to a blood relationship. The rest of them are not. Now, due to a family relationship is different. So they're not your blood, but due to your marriage, they also are prohibited for you in marriage. Therefore, they become what's called your mahram. Mahram meaning they're haram for you to get married to, and therefore you have other, they treat them like family. Step-parents, okay? The step-parent is the spouse of your actual parent, of your real parent who gave birth to you. Or your step-grandparent also. And number 7, your parent-in-law. Okay, so mother-in-law, father-in-law. That's your spouse's parent. And all grandparents as well, going up. All the in-laws going up. Stepchild. Okay, your stepchild from a spouse whom you have consummated marriage with. So that's a requirement. So you have to have consummated the marriage with that new spouse before their stepchildren become your mahrams, or your people who they cannot marry. Your child-in-law, okay, that's your child's spouse, okay, and their grandchildren as well, and that's due to family relationships, okay, and this remains intact even if you get divorced, okay, and then due to foster relationship. So any relationships due to foster relationships, meaning that one woman breastfed another child. So any relationship, foster relationships are exactly like blood and family relationships. So for example, the foster mother who breastfed you, or a foster sibling who, for example, one child was feeding with a woman and another child came and fed with the same woman. That person is your foster brother or your foster sister because they fed from the same woman. Okay? So these are prohibited. What is the condition of feeding? The feeding would be any amount of suckling during the period of breastfeeding. So while children actually get breastfed. Now the two different opinions on this are 24 months and 30 months. Let's just stick with 24 months for now. This would basically be during the period. So if somebody comes and let's say a woman freezes her milk and gives it to a 4-year-old, right? That person doesn't get included into the family. But it has to be during the period of the breastfeeding period as well. And there's 2 exceptions, right? 2 exceptions because if you think about them in a lot of detail, you'll figure it out, but you don't need to know exactly. The 2 exceptions are, it's allowed to marry the parent of the foster sibling or the sibling of the foster child. Okay? So you figure out why that is, and if you think about it, you'll make sense, but I guarantee you I'm not going to ask it on the test. If the milk is stored and given to a child after freezing, and it's during the period of that child's breastfeeding period, meaning the 2 years, 24 months that we're talking about, then it still applies. So it doesn't have to be directly from the breast. It still applies. Okay? So temporarily prohibited. So who is temporarily prohibited and then you're not allowed to marry them for now, but at some point in time you can marry them again. 2 women at the same time who, now this is, scholars are very funny. I don't know if they have a sense of humor or they're actually doing this on purpose. 2 women at the same time who, if one of them was a man, then they would not be allowed to marry each other. Basically what the original rule that applies here is 2 sisters, right? You cannot have 2 sisters at the same time, right? So there's a rule of 2 sisters, and then a sister and her aunt, for example. So there's some more examples like that. So what they did was we want to make this rule that applies to everyone. So can you marry 2 sisters at the same time? No. Now the question is, well, what is one of the reasons, or how do you figure it out? Say, a simple way to remember this is, if one of them was a male, right? One of them turns from a sister into a brother, becomes a male. Are they allowed to marry each other? No. Okay? Sister and the aunt. If one of them, either one of them turns into a male, either one becomes an uncle or one becomes a brother, whatever it is. Are you allowed to marry them? No. Anytime that happens, you just do a quick check. That means you're not allowed to marry them both at the same time. At the same time. Okay? Now, so that means that if one of them was a man, they would not be allowed to marry each other. For example, married to two sisters, a woman and her aunt, a woman and her niece at the same time. Now, I think most people understand the wisdom behind this. But if you don't, just do some counseling for people who have actually had two sisters in the same house, even unmarried or something like that, and see what happens. No, I'm serious. I'm kidding. The thing is, the reality is, you don't want to have two people of that close lineage married to the same person in the same house, or it's not going to be in the same house anyways, but it's going to cause a problem. It's going to become problematic in the relationship. So in order to prevent this type of harm in the marriage, this type of relationship has been prohibited because the two of them are very close. Okay, we're talking here about multiple marriage. Here, we're talking about polygyny here. Okay, now let me finish this and then I'll take questions. Number 2, a woman who's already married, obviously, and a man who already has 4 wives cannot marry somebody else. But when one wife is gone, another wife can come. When her husband is gone, another husband can come. Number 3, the parent or the child of someone you had an intimate relationship with outside of marriage. Okay? So the parent or the child, and you committed like fornication with somebody else, their parent or their child still remains prohibited even though it was not a correct marriage. This is still there. And number 4, a woman must marry a Muslim, but a man may marry a Jew or a Christian who believes in a prophet and a book, even though their beliefs may be corrupted from the Muslim perspective. And the reason why that is because the man is considered to be the head of the household. So he's going to basically be determining the rights of the Muslim as well as the non-Muslim and make sure that they're respected. So a lot of people have different wisdoms or different reflections upon why this is allowed or why it's not allowed. One of them has to do with the children are going to grow up to be Muslim. And we need to make sure the children are ensured. That's a wisdom and that's an important thing. But I think this is the best explanation that I've heard, is that if the man is the head of the household, he's going to determine what rights are guaranteed for the rest of the household. So, since Islam respects the people of the book, and it respects their right to practice their own religion, the man marrying a Jew or a Christian can ensure that those rights are going to be there because it comes directly from the man's religion, which is Islam. If it was flipped the other way around, right, there is no guarantee from the religion that the man is going to be respecting the rights of the Muslim because that's not intrinsically built into the Jewish or Christian religions. So even though someone will come and argue and they will say that, well, people don't make decisions based upon the religion that they follow, right? Historically, or even today, there are many people who religion is still a guiding factor for their decisions, whether they admit it or they don't admit it, or whether culture plays a role over religion sometimes or not. Islam ensures and guarantees the right of the spouse, of the Jew and the Christian to practice their faith. So for example, I'll just give you a simple example. If the husband is married to a Christian woman, and she says, I'm going to church. And he says, one day he just gets mad, 10 years into marriage, and they have kids and everything. He says, you're not going to church. I'm sick and tired of this. You're not going to church. He has no right to do that. Because he took her as a wife, he knew that she's a Christian, and she maintains her right to practice Christianity. So he does not have a right to do that. But now, if a non-Muslim man married a Muslim woman, right? Now he's considered generally the head of the household. Now if he decides 10 years into marriage, when they first got married, he was very open about everything. And he was not really into religion or anything. Then he started going to church. Then he started becoming, very interested. Then he became like, hardcore, evangelical Christian or something like that. Became very excited, and all of a sudden he's listening to some guys, and he says, you know what? That's it. You're not going to that mosque anymore. He says, no, but you have to let me go to the mosque. He says, no, I don't have to let you go to the mosque. You're my wife. You're going to stay in the home. I don't want you to be going to the mosque anymore. There's nothing intrinsically built into the religious beliefs that guarantee that he has to allow her to go to the mosque. There's nothing there. That's one of the main wisdoms or reasons behind this. I think that, for me, that was the best, most comprehensive explanation that I've come across. So, few questions, and then we're going to take a break, inshallah. Yeah, that's a good point. So the ones who are temporarily prohibited, they don't become your mahram. So you still have to observe the hijab rules and everything in front of them. You're just not allowed to marry them at the same time. Oh, she was Muslim from before. And she married someone who's Christian. If you're asking from the Islamic perspective, whether or not she's practicing, she's asking what is the Islamic perspective. Islamic perspective is that this marriage was not valid in the first place from Islam. The marriage was not valid, first of all. So if the child is coming and the husband says, I don't mind, it's okay, I'm going to stay Christian and you stay Muslim, I don't mind. She's asking, what is the Islamic position? There's two aspects. The Islamic position is that their marriage didn't count from the beginning. What should she do now? She should come in for counseling and make a decision on what she should do for her future. Because she needs to make a decision. Okay, if she refuses to divorce him and she refuses to get out of the marriage or change him and she wants to stay with him, then the question is, why is she asking what Islam says? Why? It's like somebody eating a bacon burger, proper bacon burger, and they're eating it, and while they're eating it, say, what does Islam say about bacon? It says no, it says it's not allowed to eat. Well, I'm going to keep on eating this burger, but I want to know what Islam says about bacon. My question is, whatever she wants to do, I want to know why ask the question in the first place. I don't understand the point of the question. If you're going to eat the burger, you're going to eat the burger, right? But what's the point? I don't understand. So that's why I'm saying she needs to come in for counseling, because you're hearing her asking the question and it doesn't make sense. But I know in the back of her mind there's something else going on. So she needs to come in for a counselor can figure out what's really going on in the back of her mind. Because not everyone who tells you something is telling you exactly what they're thinking. So she needs to speak to a professional who can deal with this issue. Yeah, so maybe in the back of her mind she's hesitating, or there's a cultural thing that she's saying, what, I need to change, or I need to do something. She needs to come and talk to somebody, Muslim counselor. Not her husband first. First she needs to come, then she can come second meeting with her husband. No, we said, so getting the consent from the girl, if she has given the permission to her wali, the witnesses don't need to be there during that time. If she has not given the consent, and she's going to be giving the consent during the marriage herself, then the witnesses need to see that. What do you mean? What do you mean nowadays? I do so many marriages, and I see like 20 different traditions. So explain to me which tradition you're talking about. Okay, day of the marriage. Yes. Okay, so the father is going for the consent. So as long as the girl has given the father the authority and the okay to speak on her behalf, then that transfer of authority does not need to be witnessed. But the father's statement needs to be witnessed. That's a good question. Email that to me, I'll have to look into that. In terms of the wali not praying, if there's something in the guardian that seems that they're not qualified to make this decision on a religious grounds, then she should take her case to like a court or adjudicating council, because this is going to be a problem, to a scholar basically. So this is going to be a problem. So when Allah revealed the verse that men are allowed to marry Christian women, it was already known that they were already committing shirk anyways. So the question is not, is it recommended? Is it, especially in our community? Definitely not. That's why I don't even like to bring it up, except in a law class. Remember what law is. I'm going to keep emphasizing this again and again. Law, when we say Islamic law, law is the bare minimum that you need to just make, it's the D- of the class, right? Doesn't mean that this is what's recommended for you to do. This is, you're going to pass the class with the 60%. Right? So you never aim for that. Right? So you always try to go better. So the thing is, it's recommended, obviously for the Muslim community, given the Muslim community, people are trying to get married. People cannot get married. It's difficult in our own community. They should try to stick with marrying Muslims. So the question is, can a woman, if she can't marry a Jew or Christian, can she marry someone who's a Shia? Okay. The question doesn't only apply to women. The question applies to men. Can a man marry a woman who's a Shia as well? So the thing is, if the person is claiming to be a Muslim, ascribing to be a Muslim, and nothing breaks their belief in Islam, then it would be okay. And if it doesn't break their belief in Islam, then it would not. I mean, if they believe something that clearly negates their Islam, then it's not okay. So for example, if somebody says that I believe that 10 sections of the Quran were removed or lost, right? This person is not a Muslim anymore. The person doesn't believe that and they believe in some other aspects, right? Then that means that they're still a Muslim. So technically you can marry them. Now the question arises, like I said, 60% D minus, this is the fiqh answer. Now the question is, should they get married? Right? The thing is, if she's going and her main reference happens to be a Shia imam, and he has certain beliefs, or he has certain ways, and he has certain recommendations, and they happen to be identifying with that community, this may not be the best marriage, and probably is not the best marriage. Because we've seen many marriages like this, and usually we only see them when they are in turmoil. And then people come for counseling. And we realize that, you know what, you should have thought about all of this before you actually got married in the first place. This should have been something, it's similar to somebody marrying somebody who prays and fasts and practices Islam, and marrying somebody who doesn't have the same level of religiosity as them at all. And they say, well, am I allowed to? So yeah, fiqh-wise, yes, you're allowed to marry. Are you allowed to marry someone who prays 1 time a day and you pray 5 times a day? Yes, you're allowed to. Should you? Is it going to be the best thing for your marriage? You really need to sit down and think about it and get premarital counseling, and you better be sure that this is going to be good for you. It may not be the best thing for you. So the same thing applies when it comes to marrying somebody who's like Shia or something along those lines. Your advice should be that they should go for counseling. The reason why they should go for counseling is because your way of explaining to them that they shouldn't be doing something is not going to be at the same convincing level as someone who can sit down and talk to them privately. That's why you should refer them rather than giving them an answer. If she knew her right and then she forgave him, it would be okay. If she didn't know her right and she thought it's like a forgiveness type of thing, like, you know what, she's like, I'm really sorry, but, you know, please forgive me. And she's like, okay, I forgive you. Then she still has a right to it. So it really depends on whether it was clear and she understood that it was her right to get the customary dowry that she is owed, and that he doesn't need to pay it now. It can remain a debt. So when we're talking about a debt, by the way, debt literally means debt. So if the guy dies 10 years later and he didn't pay it, this money comes out of his inheritance before he even gets inherited to his heirs. So it is hers, and he owes her the money. So it depends on what she understood. It really depends on what she understood. No, you can never pressure to forgive. Yeah, okay, so good question. So what if the wali, the guardian, pretends that he got permission from his daughter and then he married her off? All she needs to do is object, and it gets taken to a court, and the marriage is null and void from the beginning. So she should not go with the guy or the family or whatever, and the moment they come to her and say, hey, by the way, you're married, she says, I didn't give my permission. So her word takes precedence over her guardian's word in a court of law. So I said it's not one of the requirements, but it's one of the wisdoms, right? But even if the woman says, no, I want you to, do this or whatever, that's not binding. People change. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of only the man being allowed and not the woman getting into it, because no promises are binding in life, right? What are you going to do about it? Okay, well, I changed now, I've seen the light, I woke up. So what are you going to do now? Either you terminate the marriage, and if you already have kids, that's a major problem, or you stick with the marriage and you decide, okay, is this better for me or is it not better for me? So these promises will not be binding. Even if they agreed or whatever it is, it can be broken. Again, so it's a personally dependent issue. Someone needs to come for counseling and decide. It depends how many kids, it depends financial stability, it depends what's going on, there's so many variables. So all these, in terms of when to divorce and all that, people need to seek counseling. Right? It's very important. Okay. I guarantee you, 99% of Muslims don't know this. It's not just the reverts who don't know this. I guarantee you. Who grew up in a Muslim family agrees with that statement that let's say 95% of Muslims don't know this stuff, all these rights and everything? Oh yeah, you'd be surprised. At least 60 to 70% wouldn't know the details of wali. 60 to 70% wouldn't know that the mahar or the dowry is their right. They wouldn't know that the dowry cannot go to the family, but it goes to the woman, thinking that it goes to the family. You'll find Muslims who think that the mahar actually goes the opposite way, that the women need to pay due to Hindu culture. You'll be surprised at the stuff that you find. It's not, everyone is in the revert boat, to be honest with you. That's why CIS was designed with starting from scratch, assuming that no one knows anything. That's why we specifically made it that way. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it equals out for a revert. Because someone who comes from a Muslim background, they have 50% stuff, let's say, that agrees with Islam. And 50% they think is Islam, but it's the exact opposite of Islam. So those two balance out, and the fact that if you have 0, you're almost in the same boat as the other person. Because at least you don't have the harmful stuff. That's my thinking. I know it's been a tough road, but now alhamdulillah, now you know, and now you can go and teach all the other people, including the Muslims themselves. All right, so that's the whole point, inshallah. So this is a very contested issue among scholars. So two people. Oh no, so actually this is not the contested issue. Opposite is a contested issue. So they were Muslim from before. Okay, so the two of them were Muslim. One of them, the husband, changed his religion. Yeah, so he has a period of time to decide and basically decide to retract and come back to Islam. If that period of time elapses and he does not do that, then they're going to be separated. Now you said if they came for visa reasons, and if he's pretending to be a non-Muslim and he's not really, and he's actually a Muslim and he's praying and everything, that's a completely different story. Somebody actually left Islam completely, then they would be separated. You need to ask the person openly, and they need to be explained what Islam is. This is what Imam Abu Hanifa said. This person is kept aside and explained what Islam really is, and given the opportunity to come back. If they get the opportunity and they come back, then the marriage can remain intact without a new marriage, because the rest of it was considered to be in limbo, basically. But if they don't come back, then they're going to be separated. Yes, yeah, it's her responsibility. But first, before that, her responsibility is to try to bring him back and have somebody talk to him or something like that. There's a time limit, a very small time limit on this one. So they should do it ASAP. Yes. Well, see, there's two main Shia groups. Okay, one of them is the 12ers, the Ithna Ashariya, which is the mainstream. And then the other one are the Zaydis. The majority right now today is Ithna Ashari. The ones who believe in 12 imams. Like Iran, Iran and Khomeini and all of that, yeah. So they're the main ones. And then the Zaydis are in Yemen. So this is kind of, a side issue. But basically the thing is, it's all about, regardless of their belief, it's all about the person and the individual, which really matters. So if the individual believes certain things that their group doesn't necessarily believe, then, there might be more leeway with that person. And vice versa. So you have to look at the individual and see what they believe. So that's really what it comes down to. So it comes down to, whether it's someone who's claiming to be Shi'i or whether it's someone who's claiming to be Sunni, what type of person are they? What are their actual beliefs about history and about law and about the Quran and about the hadith and about which hadith we're going to be following? They should be asked. Because you'll find someone who says, well, yeah, I'm a Sunni and I follow Quran and Sunnah, but I don't believe in any hadith except, these 20 that I like or something like that. That's a problem. So you need to go and look at the individual, especially in this community where people are very individualistic. You need to look at the individual. That's why I say counseling is a must before marriage. Very, very important to see whether these people are compatible. And I know because I have contacts with the Shia imams in the community, and they say the same thing. They say the same thing to their own people, and they say, before someone decides to go and marry the other person, either we're going to send them to you or you send them to us. And both of us, we're going to look and see if this can work or it cannot work. And we also agree that many cases, it's not going to be able to work properly. So it's a mutual thing. And we sit down and we know the other person. So it's not like it's some huge sectarian conflict or something. That's just the way it is. It's the way that people understand their religion, and they understand it differently. So 2 things. One, the answer is yes, we should have these conversations. So set up a Friday family night. You can recommend it to our masjid. Number 2, when you say, who am I to say it? It's not about what you're saying or what I'm saying. It's about what Allah is saying. So as Muslims, we come back and say, this is what Allah says. That's what it is. Whether we understand the wisdom or we don't understand the wisdom, or wisdom is going to apply in all circumstances or not apply in all circumstances, that's not really the main issue. But in terms of, yes, this is a legitimate concern a lot of people have. Should we have a talk about it? Should we have a discussion about it? Yeah, we should. We should set it up. I personally, I would like to see more debates. I'm just one of those people who like to see that. So I would love to set up a debate with somebody else, and this can be our Friday Family Night program. Like we had the debate on Syria, people really benefited from it. We can have a debate on this subject, inshallah. Moving on to engagement. So when it comes to engagement, it's recommended for 2 people to look at each other before they get married. So that's, some of you may think that's ridiculous, obviously. But there are some cultures where you don't look at the person. And in fact, in Islam, it's recommended to at least see each other. At least see the face, know the person who you're getting married to before you get married. Because in Hindu culture, for example, you see, at least from what I know, you see the bride and the groom for like the first time in your life on your wedding day when the wedding is like taking place. So some cultures have that. But in Islam, that's not recommended. However, the gaze must not be lustful. So you don't look at your potential spouse with lust, but you just look at them to, just see everything is, okay. You could live with them and everything's okay. Engagement. So what is engagement? Is there actually a concept of engagement in Islam? Engagement in Islam, for lack of a better word, all it is, it's a merely verbal agreement between 2 parties that they intend to get married. It's just an agreement, okay, we're going to get married, and we're going to set a date, and or even if there's no date, we are going to go forward with this. It doesn't even get to the level of a promise. So it's not a vow, it's not a promise. If you break the engagement, there is no sin on you. If you violate the agreement, you don't have to make an expiation or anything like that. The only thing that you get out of engagement is that no one else can propose to that person once the engagement has gone forward. If the engagement has not gone forward and 2 people are meeting and talking, another person can come and actually say, well, I would also like to be interested in this brother or this sister. So basically all engagement is, what's called in fiqh, it's called the rukun. It's once you reach a level of seriousness that this relationship is moving forward, no one else is allowed to intervene and start saying, you know what, I got someone who's better for you than that person. Once the engagement's done, you're not supposed to intervene, because then that will create hard feelings and hostility between the other person, especially if you break up their engagement. There are no other privileges. And I need to emphasize this again. There are no other privileges. And I'm going to say it for the 3rd time. There are no other privileges that result from the engagement. That means that the couple who's engaged cannot hold hands. They cannot be alone together. They cannot go to the mall together. They cannot, they cannot be, doing anything. So the same rules of hijab and, apply across the board, okay, in terms of intimacy and privacy and all those things. Nothing else results from engagement. And this is a very problem in cultures that think that engagement somehow opens up the way for some privileges, but it does not. The wedding banquet, what's known as the walima, is after the marriage. After the marriage, it's recommended to have this banquet, what's called the walima, to invite people so that you can announce that the wedding has taken place. So this is basically the purpose behind it, is to announce and to celebrate the wedding. So the actual wedding contract, the marriage contract, does not have to be witnessed by a large number of people. Even if there's a large number of people there, it's this that kind of celebrates the contract or celebrates the wedding that's taken place. Any type of food can be served in the walima. So it's not like an aqiqah, when your child is born, that meat should be served or the meat is slaughtered. Any type of food can be served. whether it's meat or not meat or whatever it is. If somebody's invited to a walima or a wedding banquet, it's very emphasized that they should attend. And they should not, they need to respond, because it's considered to be a very important thing that you attend a walima, unless you have a really good excuse. And the good excuse could be that you actually have another appointment, a very important appointment at the same time. Another excuse could be there are things which are prohibited going to be taking place over there and you don't want to join in that. And I know that there's going to be a lot of questions on that. And it could be that you're protesting against the fact that only wealthy people were invited and the poor people were excluded. If you're into that, protest. So if you have some good reason for not going, understandable. If there's no good reason, you should go, and you should try to make time to go, especially when it's somebody who you know inviting you. Intercourse. Once the couple is married, they may be intimate. So the moment the contract is done, they can consummate the marriage whenever they want, whether or not that's before the wedding, what do we call it? Wedding banquet, the walima, or after the walima. It doesn't make a difference. Although many cultures stipulate that it should only be done, or it's shameful to do it before the banquet, the walima. So even though Islamically it's not a requirement, custom should be taken into consideration, and it should be respected if that's part of the custom that's there. So you should wait a little bit if that's part of the culture and the custom. Because it's not like it's a required thing to do. It's something that you have the choice to do. This is allowed, intercourse is allowed in any way as long as it's through the front and it's not during menstruation. So any type of foreplay or any type of whatever thing, we mentioned that in the last class as well, is allowed, but as long as it's not during menstruation and it's in the front part. Okay, the front part, not necessarily the position of front. So that's important to understand the difference between that. Contraception is allowed if there is a reason for it. Okay, and the reason should not be that fear of poverty. We're not going to be able to take care of the kids, or we're not going to be able to do this, because that's basically not trusting in Allah. So unless you're in like a war zone or something like that, generally, if you can, give up your smartphone and you can give up, some of the other luxuries you have in life, you'll be okay. Your children will generally survive. So fear of poverty should not be one of the reasons for using contraception. And secondly, it has to be done with the consent of the wife. So contraception is required with the consent of the wife, because she has the right to children as well. So she has the right to children, so it has to be done with her consent. And this comes back to the importance of, children. So this is one of the reasons why, people marry. Can the woman do? No, with the consent of both. This is based on old coitus interruptus. It was the only method that existed before. So with the consent of both, obviously, because they both have the right to children. All right. Do questions for marriage? Okay, let me put my questions for marriage out there first, and then I'll take your questions. Okay. Exchanging wedding rings and kissing the bride in public, are these things that are allowed? Exchanging wedding rings in and of themselves are not prohibited, but if they are considered to be religious in nature, then it becomes a problem. I think we have already addressed this already. The kissing in public, I would advise against that, although I came across a different fatwa. Anyways, is it allowed for women to trill their tongues, as many Arab cultures do, during the wedding? You know what I'm talking about? Can somebody just do it for a second so we know what we're talking about? Yeah. So everyone got that? So trilling the tongue, yes, it's like clapping hands. So there's nothing actually against it. This is a question. Reciting Surah Al-Fatiha during the engagement. So a lot of people, it's become custom in some cultures to recite Surah Al-Fatiha when people are getting engaged. So that's used in some cultures as a way to announce the intention and as like a blessing or something. So it's not wrong to do that, as long as it's understood that it's not part of the religion, it's just part of the culture. What does engagement do? Like I said, engagement does not have any other benefits. Can the marriage be consummated before the walima, before the wedding feast? Technically yes, but you should take local customs into consideration. What do you say to the couple to congratulate them after the marriage? Say, may Allah bless you and yours and bring you both together in goodness. So you can say it in English or you can say it in Arabic. That's mentioned in many books. What is a good amount of dowry? What is a good amount of dowry? And I know some people already started demanding more dowry from their husbands outside the door during break time. I apologize for that. So what is a good amount of dowry? It's determined by custom. And it should neither harm the woman, nor should it be so excessive that it prevents marriages from taking place. This is the balance, certainly. Can I set a divorce-only dowry amount that's really large? This is a common question, actually. So can I set this, I don't want this much dowry, I only want $5,000. But once we get married, I want to set this thing that if you divorce me, you got to pay me $100,000 to make sure that the guy never divorces her. Right? This is a common question. And the answer is no, you can't do that. Okay? You cannot set a specific clause which says only upon divorce. Either the dowry is there or it's not there. So if he agrees to it, it's going to be there no matter what. For example, if the guy dies, right? Does it count or is it only for divorce? So if he dies and he still owes you $100,000, he has to pay. It comes out of his wealth. So you're not really allowed to do that. Can dowry agreed to be paid in installments? Like you're literally paying on a regular basis? Yes, you can do that. Can you make dowry which has no due date? So you don't tell when exactly you're going to pay it? Yes, but it's like a debt which needs to be paid. And if it needs to be collected, the woman could technically, if we had a court, she could actually go to court and demand payment, just like you can go and demand payment of a debt. But there should be more love in the marriage, besides that. Are parents allowed to put pressure on their children to marry someone since they know what's best for them? The answer is no. It is the right of the children. So they can advise, and they should be giving advice, and that's the whole point of guardianship. But they cannot force, because the idea of what's best for them, maybe the person may be wrong. So the leader should actually legislate punishments for parents who are crossing the boundaries of Islamic law, and they should revoke the guardianship of these people. So if there's a Muslim authority somewhere, and this is happening in certain cultures, it's the responsibility of the Muslim leadership to actually revoke the guardianship of these type of people who are forcing their children. And this is not my fatwa, these are other fatwas I'm coming across. And Sheikh Salman Auda, I really like his stance here. Women should stand up for their rights and not consent to forced marriages in order to protect cultural notions of honor. Obedience to parents does not include being forced to marry whom they choose. So obedience to parents does apply in all other aspects, but it doesn't apply in choosing a spouse, and it doesn't apply in doing something that's prohibited in Islam. So this is pretty clear cut in Islam. Otherwise, there would be no point in saying that the spouse has the right to refuse a marriage. Okay. If a Muslim man married a Christian woman, how must the ceremony be, since the Catholic Church does not consider marriage without a priest as valid, and it would be considered adultery? So this is another issue. So the Catholic Church doesn't allow a Catholic woman to marry a Muslim man unless the priest is actually performing or blessing or sanctifying the marriage contract. So I would say this requires counseling. So rather than giving you the detailed answer, it just come for counseling if that happens. What is the husband's responsibility to the stepchildren? Okay, that's about divorce. Can a wife steal from her husband if he doesn't give her enough money? Oh, now we're getting into the real stuff. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised that there is a difference of opinion on this. And I'm very firm on one opinion. And my teachers are also very firm on one opinion. And that is the Maliki and the Hanafi opinion, that we should go with this. The reason why there's a difference of opinion is because Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said, Abu Sufyan is a miser. He doesn't give us enough money and we can't survive like this. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, you can take from his money whatever is sufficient for you and sufficient for your children. Now comes the difference of opinion. Difference of opinion is, was this a ruling like a judge, or was this a fatwa, a legal opinion? And there's Imam Qarafi, he wrote an entire book on this issue, on whether it's a fatwa or whether it's a qada. There's a world of difference, and you have to understand the world of difference. So what one school is saying is, the Prophet listened to her case, knew Abu Sufyan, knew her situation, and he said, yes, I know what kind of person he is, and I know that this is taking place, and therefore you have a special right. I give you permission to go ahead and do this. This is not general permission to anyone to do it who has not first consulted me, and there's been no investigation done, and nobody knows, is this your word versus the other person? You don't tell anyone and you just go ahead and do it. So this is what's known as qada, a verdict from a judge who's investigated the situation. And this is the opinion that I adhere to, and I think it's very important. Otherwise, if you don't have this system, everyone can do anything. So you know what? Hey, that's my laptop, man. This guy stole my laptop. I'm just going to steal it back. I'm just going to steal it back. I'm just going to take it back. No one is going to investigate, say, hey, Islamically I have a right, right? It looks like mine. It looks exactly like mine. Islamically I have a right to go and take it back. So do I have a right to take back something that somebody stole from me? Oh, yeah, you do. Oh, well, that looks exactly like mine. I'm going to go and take the laptop. Imagine what kind of anarchy you would have in society, right? Huge. This would be a huge problem. Therefore, it should only be done upon consultation. No, you can't privately steal from your husband's wealth. You need to go and have somebody arbitrate between the two of you and see whether or not you're entitled to this in reality or not. And then if you are entitled and you have a judgment and he refuses the judgment, then it's a whole different scenario. Otherwise, no. Stealing is stealing. And I'm very, very adamant about this opinion. Because literally you're stealing. Because if you make a mistake and you say, well, I think that I deserve the iPhone 5S and he's not buying it for me, so I'm going to go into his wallet and steal it. That's stealing. You don't deserve that. I mean, it's not like something you need, right? So this is definitely not allowed, and we need to be very, very careful about this. Does a wife have to obey her husband if it is something against Islam? So we hinted at this already. So there's 4 aspects of obedience. Number 1, she must obey him if it's something that's commanded by Islam. So if he says, look, you need to wear hijab or you need to start praying, and you're not even praying, you need to pray, then yes, she has to obey him, obviously, because she's obeying Allah. Number 2, if it's something beneficial to him, or it's something to stop something harmful to him, then he should also obey her. So obey him. She should obey him, right? So if he's saying that something, in the family or something along those lines that needs to be done, yes, she should obey that, because that's part of the marriage, being the head of the household. Number 3, if it's something regarding her personal affairs, not regarding him, but regarding her personal affairs, such as giving him money. He says, look, you need to give me that $500 that you just got as a gift. You have to obey me. Obedience to the husband is required. She does not have to obey. If he tries to stop her from seeing her friends, for example, outside of the house, and the friends are not deemed to be a detriment or a problem or a family or something like that, then she does not need to obey him. However, she should be wise and she should weigh the harms and the benefits that can accrue from not doing that. So if he says, look, give me that $100, she doesn't have to give him the $100. But what could the harm be? And what's the situation? And why is he demanding this and all that? You need to use wisdom as well. Even though you don't have to, always use wisdom. You don't do everything that you have to. Number 4, if he asks you to disobey Allah, she must not obey him at all. Okay? Marriage after fornication. If somebody fornicates and then they want to get married, the couple have boyfriend and girlfriend, they want to get married, is it allowed or it's not allowed? Because the Quran says something about that, and there's different understandings of what that means. It's allowed if and only if they've actually repented and they've ask Allah for forgiveness. Otherwise, if they don't and they get married without repenting and they just keep on going, the child will not be attributed to the father in the case of fornication. Okay? Marriage by telephone. Can you perform marriage by telephone, and can you perform marriage by Skype or by email or text messaging or something along those lines? If it's clear that the witnesses are able to identify the voice of the bride and the groom or their picture or whatever, and the wording is clear and there's nothing getting cut off or anything, then it would be allowed. But something like email definitely would not work because it's not simultaneous, number one. And number two, you can't verify the other person's identity. So what about a chat room? Same thing, it's how do you know for sure it's that person's identity? So it's very sketchy. So definitely you wouldn't want to do that. Over the telephone, if the witnesses can tell that this is the right person. Otherwise, it's like, well, the sister agreed to getting married. So, well, that wasn't the sister. That was some other random person just pretending to be her. If a man promises to not marry a second wife, is it binding? Is it binding upon him? There's a difference of opinion on this. There's a big difference of opinion on this. And my opinion is that it's not binding, but it's a promise. So if somebody makes a promise, they should fulfill the promise. And if they're going to break their promise, then they're expiating a vow. But if it's binding, meaning part of the marriage contract, then you have a problem. Because the problem is, if she changed her mind and he changed his mind and let's say war broke out or whatever happened, then actually if he did that, then their marriage would automatically be broken even if they don't want to do it. So adding different marriage conditions in the marriage contract, which is not an intrinsic part of the contract, will not invalidate the marriage, in my opinion, opinion of many scholars. Is a wife entitled to have a maid that's paid by the husband as part of her living arrangements? Actually, we're going to cover this later. Only if it's a custom for women of her status, then yes. Otherwise, no. What is the role of a husband in housework? Yeah, now we need the woman's point of view, right? So we can leave these questions for later. Husband forgiving senior relatives. Can a man stop his wife from working? Okay, what is the role of a husband? It all comes back to custom. So custom has held that generally men will work outside and women primarily will be taking care of the domestic household matters. However, they can always help each other when needed. So that means both ways across the board. So if the husband wants to help the household, he can do that. And if the wife wants to help by working as well, she can do that. So it's not against, but usually culture and custom will decide that. So if somebody wants to have a purely egalitarian marriage, are they allowed to do that in Islam? Egalitarian meaning everything is 50-50. You work part-time and you take care of the kids part-time. She works part-time, she takes care of the kids part-time. Is this allowed in Islam? It's allowed. Is it required in Islam? No. Is it the standard? No. But it's allowed in Islam. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it. I don't feel that this is the best type of marriage, and you can debate that, but it's allowed. So if somebody wanted that, Islam does not enforce restrictions upon something like that. When we talked about marriage age and stuff like that, it doesn't enforce restrictions, specific restrictions like that. Can a man stop his wife from working? Only if there's some type of danger or there's some reason. She's neglecting the family or the children or something like that. She should be chaste. Yeah, she should not be someone who's a loose woman going around with a bunch of other people and then you marry her. Yeah, obviously, that's the same thing applies for Muslim women. But there's no difference in terms of whether she's before or after. The thing is, it's not a requirement because there's even a special waiting period that she has to go through. Imam Abu Hanifa had an opinion that if she's coming from a land of war with the Muslims, her waiting period is actually different than the waiting period of somebody else. So it's definitely allowed. It's not that it's not allowed if she had been previously married. That's the dowry in the first place, the mahar. I mean, if somebody adds another condition. I'll give you an example. I have a couple, a friend of mine, they got married and the woman asked the guy, said, my condition, I want you to promise me in part of the marriage that you're going to plant 20 trees. Very green guy, mashallah. So he said, part of your requirement, it's not part of your dowry, but you have to plant 20 trees in order to marry me. So he said, okay, I agree. I'm going to give you this much money and I'm going to plant 20 trees. Now, the thing is, this guy, I just had a feeling he's not going to, be very good at this. So he didn't do his tree thing yet. So the problem is their marriage null and void now because she threw this condition in? No, I'm not talking. Mu'akhar is part of the dowry. It's mahar, same thing. Mu'ajjal, mu'akhar. It falls in the same category. Yeah, there's advanced and deferred. Right? In reality, this comes under the same category as dowry. In reality, there's no such thing as deferred and actual dowry. You combine the two together and you pick the amount, 5,000. You say, but I can only pay you 500 right now. The rest is going to be a debt. The rest, we call that mu'akhar. Right? It's going to be deferred for a later period of time. But it's still mahar, still sadaq. Oh yeah, it's a debt. Oh yeah, you got to pay. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why you have to pay the mu'akhar. It's not just, oh yeah, if I can, if I get a good job, then I'll pay you. You have to. You have to. It doesn't matter. It's not about divorce. Divorce means that, upon divorce, it means you've delayed this loan too long. You should have paid this earlier, and now that you delayed this loan, you gotta pay it on the spot. It's not that it's only due on divorce. It's due anyways. No, mahar is not connected to divorce. Guaranteed, it's not connected. It's connected to marriage. So when you get married, you're entitled to the mahar. The only time some of it comes back is if you divorce before the consummation of the marriage, or if the woman petitions for the divorce, which we're going to see next week. That's the only time pretty much that the mahar can be, retracted and given some back. Otherwise, no, it's not connected to divorce. It's connected to the marriage. It's due. It's like a debt that's due. He gives it to her property, and her property gets distributed among her inheritors. No, dowry doesn't have to be in the form of cash, but what I was saying to her is that this is not going to be part of the marriage contract. So planting the trees, it's a promise that he's making to you or something. It's nice, but don't make it as part of the marriage contract, and it's not going to count as part of the marriage contract. Let me contextualize that hadith for you, by the way. I know the sisters are not going to like this. The brothers have been waiting for this their whole life. The hadith specifically says that the Prophet used to do what other people did. And then she explained that he used to do this in the house, do this in the house, do this in the house. Why did she explain it that way? Because people assume that he's like a king or a president who is up there who doesn't do these things. And she wanted to show that he also does these things to help out. Right? Yeah, exactly. So he made time. But does that mean that he does this every day? No way. When he's in the Battle of Uhud, he was sweeping the house? When he was at Tabuk, he was sweeping the house? No way. So it means that what it means is he didn't see these things as being underneath him. They were not below him. He would also participate in these things when he had extra time. It doesn't become mandatory or something like that. But what it means is you should not think that these things are above you. Like some people, they work in a company or something, and the janitor is on break. I'm not going to clean the toilet. I'm a programmer, or I'm a this, or I'm an executive. How dare you ask me to do something like that? It should not be above you. You should not think that anything's below you and that you're above some kind of task. That's what the hadith was really trying to clarify, right? Which is important for today. Some people think it's below them. Yeah, she should, depending on the circumstance. You have to see his word and her word. If they're both in agreement, then yes, easily. They should go for counseling. But yeah, she should try and get her, if it's a right, she should be entitled to a right. Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a big problem in some cultures. I hear that this has become a culture. That, you know what? Oh, she has waived her right. What is she has waived her right? So well, in our culture we waive the right. No. You can't waive your right in your culture. You can't make your culture something which is already a right. You can't take away a right. Now if she, of her own accord, says, you know what, I'm just going to give this back to you as a gift, she can do that. Money should be transferred and then retransferred back. So technically, no, it doesn't have to be written for it to be binding. But in America, we should write it. We must write it, and it must be registered, by the way. Marriages in America have to be registered with the government. Right? And that has to do with child custody. It has to do with going for Hajj. You're not going to be able to even go for Hajj. You're not going to be able to, prove that you're actually a couple. So it's very, very important. to make sure the marriage is registered. And please convey to anyone who's doing unregistered marriages to please stop, because we're trying to change the system around here, and some people don't see the wisdom behind that. It's very, very important that marriages must be registered, all right? With the one exception of something which you're not legally allowed to do. And I'm not taking a stance on that. What I'm talking about, multiple wives, is against the law, obviously. So obviously you can't register that, right? So in a case like that, you need to be very careful that you have some system that's going to ensure the right of whichever person is not getting registered. And with the absence of that, it shouldn't be done, because there's too much room for abuse, inshallah. Some people made some very good points in that, look, there is a gray area between how much makeup is considered to be provocative or enticing, versus what is considered to not be to that same extent. So there is a gray area, and I think one of the really good factors, you have two options really. One of them is to avoid the gray area. If you see that there's a gray area, try to avoid the gray area. That's probably better for, it's safer for your deen, for your religion. The second is that it really depends on your intention as well. And intention plays a big factor in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to judge you. So if you are, it should be good, inshallah. So if you're dressing yourself up and you're wearing certain type of makeup that is more attractive to, let's say, men, rather than just being something, just to look decent in front of women or to look nice or something like that, then Allah is going to hold you accountable for your intention as well. So that's why I said when it changes with society, the society is judged in different ways. So your intention does make a big difference. So take that into consideration when you're applying whatever you're applying. So I think that's a very important point, and that's a legitimate concern actually, because oftentimes people can overdo it, and it causes a problem even in their own circle, and they say, well, they shouldn't be looking at me or something like that. The thing is, if you're doing that, then they're going to be looking at you. And I deal with non-Muslims on a regular basis, and when I talk to them, when they say, what you just described to me, that my chest area is open and everything, the common argument that they make is, well, why should men be looking at me? Why can't they just lower their gaze? I said, that's understandable from their perspective. Yeah, they should be averting their gaze, but at the same time, why are you doing it? They say, well, I like the attention. And that's usually the answer. I like the attention. I said, then you can't blame somebody else. Right? You can't blame somebody else. And almost all of them, I'm telling you, almost all of them agree with this point. And they say, you have a point. They may not change, but they agree with the point, at least in principle. So it's something, it's a pretty good reminder, and it's an important reminder. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a good clarification. I think somebody had brought that up before. So the thing is, keep in mind the hijab, we've actually taken the idea of hijab and limited. We think that it's only the head covering itself, but it's actually more than that. It's the criteria that we talked about before. So we talked about transparency. It has to be opaque. It should not be transparent clothing, and it should be loose enough so that it's not describing the body parts in detail. So that becomes a big problem when very, very tight-fitting clothing is marketed at people. So we should keep in mind that that's the definition, or that's the understanding of what true hijab actually is. And that applies for the men as well, as we said. Even the men with the really tight pants or something like that, same thing applies. Define jilbab. Okay. In terms of what we have to wear, as long as you meet the requirements, you're fine. As long as it's loose, it's opaque, and it covers the needed parts, it's fine. Whatever style you wear. So it doesn't matter whether it's one garment with a separate garment over the top, or whether it's a loose skirt, or whether it's a loose pants, or whether it's a different type of fitting outfit. I know some scholars say that the jilbab has to be a separate loose garment that goes on top. An outer garment that has to go on top. But the thing is, if you look at it from the perspective of what we call the maqasid, or the end goals, the ultimate objective of it, as long as it fulfills the criteria, it's going to work. Whether it's outer garment or inner garment, as long as it has the right criteria, inshallah. Oh, you're talking about the ankle? If it goes under the knee, then we're in big trouble. Yeah. So, yeah. Regarding the narration about the ankle pants going below the ankle, that also was the same thing which we were talking about in terms of dragging the clothing. So the two fall in the same category. Although scholars hold different opinions, and many scholars say that it's actually disliked to have the pants below the ankles, so that you're not getting anywhere close to the dragging thing. But I think in this society, having it below the ankles but not dragging on the floor with the intention that you're not doing it out of pride would be okay. You can always alter your clothes, remember. You can always cut them, you can get them altered. There's some good places to get altered, or you can cut them yourself, and you can sew them. That one's not coming to my mind right now. The one that does come to my mind is one that woman who does that wears strong perfume, and she's like an adulterer. She's like a fornicator. Right? So that hadith is specifically talking about women who are doing it with the intention of luring other people, because she's trying to lure other people. And it talks about the women of Banu Israel, how they used to keep some type of perfume in their ring, and when men would walk by, they would, they had like this technology, they should put something and then the perfume came out, and they were trying to lure the men with it. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, was cursing those people because they were trying to lure the men. So two things. One, it has to do with being light and heavy, and there's a gray area between the two, and it has to do with your intention as well. No, that's wrong. If it's light perfume and no one else is going to be able to really smell it, then what's the issue with it? Right? Because the perfume itself is not the issue, right? Unless maybe they were talking about the alcohol perspective of the perfume. That's a whole different issue. But in terms of simply just wearing something where it's extremely light and almost no one else can smell it, that's not going to invalidate your prayer or anything like that. So we mentioned that last week. So the hadith about shaving is actually considered weak. So in terms of the shortness of the hair, there's no restriction, but it's culturally defined. It's culturally defined. So if in your culture, it becomes, if the really short hair becomes something that which resembles men in that culture, then you should avoid it. But for example, Aisha, radiallahu anha, she was known to have quite short hair. And the reason why she had short hair is because she kept on performing Umrah all the time, again and again. She performed so many times Umrah, and she would cut her hair every time, so she had very short hair. So in terms of shortness, it's culturally defined. There's no specific requirements. Oh yeah. I'm glad you brought this up. So why aren't female scholars involved in our discussions? Why are males getting together and discussing female issues? Right? To be very honest with you, this question really annoys me. I'm going to be very straightforward with you. Because for me, if we talk about equality in Islam, equality between the genders, then there's no issue if women scholars get together and address male issues, and there should be no issue whether male scholars get together and address women's issues. Now, I know where you're coming from, and I know where people are coming from. They feel that, well, women are kind of being excluded from the group. So the issue is about understanding the female context. Men, I would make the opposite argument. Is that the women don't get it, because the men are the ones who are attracted by the makeup. They get it more because they're the ones who get the feelings, right? Women, when they wear it, they say, well, I'm doing it, I like the attention, but I also do it to look nice. So you have the look nice and the attention part. Who is giving you the attention? It's the men. So the men, if they come out with a brand new product, right, and they're marketing it, and you got all your makeup companies and everything marketing all over the place, and the men, they don't like the woman that you chose to market it, that product is going to fail because they're trying to attract the men. That's the whole point. So I would make the opposite argument. Of course, I think ideally both should get together and discuss it and try to look at different aspects of it. But when we're talking about the eyebrow issue or something like that, this is not an issue of custom. The hadith specifically talks about eyebrows. What you're allowed to do with your eyebrows, what you're not allowed to do with the eyebrows. The only scholarly discussion that's going to take place on eyebrows is what was the intention of the hadith. Whether it was intended for a specific group of people, whether it was intended for a woman during her waiting period, whether it was intended as a general prohibition, whether it was intended to a certain group of prostitutes. That has to be defined according to scholarly standards. When talking about custom or urf, I agree with you completely that men and women should be looking at other perspectives, both should be included to determine what is custom. But when we're only looking at a hadith and trying to figure out what is the actual meaning of this hadith, male, female, doesn't make a difference. If somebody is khuntha, right? Somebody is a, what's the word? Somebody's half male, half female, physically, what is it called? A hermaphrodite, yeah. So if somebody's a hermaphrodite and they're involved in a discussion, that's not going to affect their interpretation of the scholarly aspect of the hadith. When trying to determine custom and culture, I agree with you completely, that men and women should get together. But when they're not, when it's only, when someone's trying to decide, do you wipe your head 3 times or 1 time? I know there's a whole feministic, reading in terms of it's going to make a difference somehow, but I don't feel that there's any difference whether a man is interpreting it or whether a woman is interpreting it. So that's my position on that. But I had a sister, not a sister. I had a non-Muslim in my class just on Thursday at the university, and she's a self-proclaimed, feminist, trying to say that all these scriptures, Christian scriptures, Muslim scriptures, have all been tainted by men reading things into them. So we were looking at 2 books. We were looking at Mufti Taqi Uthmani's book on the Quran. We were looking at Ingrid Matsson's book. So she said, Ingrid Mattson wrote this way because she's a woman, and Taqi Uthmani, he wrote this way because he's a man. So I said, so basically what you're saying is, if somehow if Ingrid Mattson was a man, she would have been writing more like Taqi Uthmani. She said, absolutely. And I said, if Taqi Uthmani was a woman, he would be writing more like Ingrid Mattson. She said, absolutely. I said, the entire class disagrees with you. Not Muslims and non-Muslims. The entire class disagreed with her, but it's interesting. I said, if we inject some hormones into Ingrid Mattson or Mufti Taqi, right, and turn them into the opposite gender, are they going to start all of a sudden change their style of writing? No. I don't think it's going to make that much a difference in their scholarly aspect, in terms of their scholarly argument. So that's my take. I agree that that's a part of an issue, but to tell me that no woman in the back of her mind enjoys the attention that they get from men from dressing up, I find that very hard to swallow. Yeah, they don't know the names, they don't know the styles, but they know either this looks nice or it doesn't look nice. They know what attracts them, right? Either it's going to attract them or it's not going to attract them. That's as simple as that's the culture. I think that's like as clear. They're not going to tell you, oh wow, she's wearing the cherry blossom new lipstick from Vogue or whatever it is. Yeah, we don't know that, but we know either it looks good or it doesn't look good. That's it. So I know that there's another issue. The issue is, that generally women have also another aspect of attracting women as well. Yeah, and men don't have that so much. If men are going to dress up or try to look cool, it's more for, generally for opposite gender rather than trying to look cool for the guys specifically. They're not interested too much in that. But yeah, these are customs. This is part of culture. So in some cultures, maybe women will dress up only for women. Maybe there's some cultures, but still, if it has the same effect on the men, then it still should be taken into consideration. Okay, so the thing is, the mustache has to be trimmed, okay? But the understanding is, it can be trimmed, or it can be shaved, or it can be plucked. So whenever you hear something about trimming, or shaving, or plucking, usually, either one of the 3 can work. So in terms of shaving it, or trimming it, or plucking it, as long as it's not being left to go above the lip, like we said, that's sufficient, that's fine. No, cutting it all off together is just keeping it short. At minimum, and shaving, they fall in the same category. Yeah, same category. So it's part of the beard. So the ruling on the beard is the same as the ruling on the mustache, keeping it short. It's mandatory, that's right. It's mandatory to keep it short, yes. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.